So this video follows a recent video I did, and I made the promise in that video that this one would follow. But let me just say that before I get too far into it, this whole series on that started off with the Hittite laws and the shattering of the tablets at the base of Mount Sinai has just blossomed into all kinds of other videos, as you've seen. I want to say at this point, probably half of the videos in this series were not planned. Half of them probably were planned. Angel and I talked about them, but the other half are things just coming out as we both think about the implications, the meanings, the relationships of what happens with the shattering of the tablets themselves, what's written on the tablets, what's not written on the tablets. This is one of those videos that came out because of the shattering of the tablets. So, anyway, I promised in that previous video that this one would follow. Here it is. Video is going to follow this one too, by the way. I want you to recall from that video that the Hebrew word for renew, ḥāḍāš, it's expressed as a noun and a verb and an adjective. And each of those different forms of that word carries an entirely different application of its meaning. But I'm going to focus on the adjective form. So we're going to see a repeat here of vines. We are then going to move to the New Testament theological dictionary. We're going to actually look at two different volumes of that. It's forget what it is now, 4 or 5 volume set. This is another useful tool that I have brought out in the past. It's a theological workbook of the Old Testament 2 volume set. We're going to look at all those here. And of course, nothing like original Hebrew language to refute and defeat Adventism, as it does every single time it's tried. So let's start right here with Vine's dictionary, which you saw in the first video I did. Here's Vine's. Here are the 3 forms of the word ḥāḍāš in its verb, noun, and adjective forms. The verb form is the only meaning that carries, as you see here, a meaning of bringing something back into existence that existed in the past. But here's the problem for Adventism. That form of ḥāḍāš does not appear in Exodus. Matter of fact, it doesn't appear in the entire Pentateuch. It's just not there. Moses didn't even use that word, so that refutes Adventism. Of course, ḥāḍāš as a noun is always referring to lunar events, new moons, new months, etc. But the adjective form is the one we're going to focus on, because as an adjective, it means new, or the opposite of old. It describes something not previously known. So let's look here at the Dictionary of Old Testament Theology Exegesis. We will look at volume number 2. And let's do a little refresher here. At the top, we see ḥāḍāš. It's make new, restore, renew. That one form of it. In the other form, it's new or fresh. And of course, we have new moon. So there we have the noun, the verb, and the adjective. And we can see here the verb is mentioned 10 times. The adjective 53 times, and the new moon, the new month, etc. 280 times. But let's look at the adjective form, because that's what we're going to focus on. So in the adjective, it means in the historical context, the adjective new is being used in contrast to old, meaning previously unknown, especially pertaining to a state of being new or different. Now, the previous video proved that none of the forms of renew, none of the forms, the noun, the verb, or the adjective, supported a covenant being renewed. Matter of fact, the Hebrew word for renew does not appear in Exodus 34, which all the Adventists love to run to, say the covenant's been renewed. No, it hasn't. The Hebrew word doesn't even appear there. It doesn't appear in Exodus. And the Hebrew word for renew as a verb, which means to bring something back into existence, does not appear in the entire Pentateuch. So Adventism is utterly refuted, typically by the Hebrew. So this adjective, this one we're looking at here as an adjective, carries the form of being something new, previously not existing, and different. The word is used in Jeremiah 31. Look with me here. 31:31. When I make a new covenant. And 32. It's not going to be the covenant like the one I made with their fathers. Look at the bottom. The adjective, the word new, which is used here in Jeremiah 31, previously unknown. So Jeremiah is saying, from words from God, which God is saying, when I make a covenant with you that you previously don't know anything about, and it's going to be a new covenant, which you don't know about. Now here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the various ways Adventists redefine the word new, and muddle the English language, and muddle the Hebrew. We're going to see in Adventism, new does not mean New. Let's start here. Problem number one for Adventists. New does not mean new and not previously existing. They want to go totally against all Hebrew scholar and grammar, and actually they go against the English too. But let's let Adventists do it for us. Look right here from 2014. We got Jeremiah 31:33 cited. The new covenant does not envisage an abrogation or even a change of law, but only a change in location from tablets of stone to the heart. So what does new mean? New means a different location in Adventism. Well, let's look at a different Adventist definition of new. Here's from 1975. And we have an adult Sabbath school lesson, Jeremiah 31, of course. And it starts with this. In this book of hope, Jeremiah recorded God's promise of a new covenant. The previous one was broken, and it there was to be a covenant between God and his chosen people. He must reinstitute it. This he promised to do. The goal of this new covenant was to be the same as the Sinaitic covenant. New means the same. Look at this. Look at this new Adventist definition. The Adventist definition of new is, well, to be the same. It's absolutely crazy what they do to the language here. This one's even worse. Look at this here from 1994. There is essentially nothing essentially new in God's new covenant. You just got to be. I can't even make this stuff up. The new covenant is not new, is what Adventists are saying. Look at these definitions for new in Adventism. New is not new. New only means a change in location, and new means, well, to be the same as the old. It's just insane what Adventists do to both the Hebrew and the English. The Hebrew word ḥāḍāš means new and not previously existing. Just that alone right there refutes Adventism. New actually means new. It's very closely to what you think about in the English language. Jeremiah 31:31 is clear. Jeremiah 31:31, the promise of a new covenant. It promises a future covenant that presently, at the time of Jeremiah, does not exist, and it will be in a different form. There's a new covenant coming. Jeremiah 31:31 is a prophecy that the old covenant will be replaced by a new covenant that didn't exist at the time Jeremiah uttered those words. He doesn't know when this new covenant's coming, but God told him it's coming at some point in time. So the Adventist teaching that Jeremiah 31:31, it's the same, it's not new, etc., is an unbiblical teaching. It's Adventism pouring their own terms and definitions into the biblical text unwarranted, because the biblical text does not support Adventist teaching. So here's problem number one for Adventists. Well, we can actually solve problem number one. Adventists are just simply wrong. ḥāḍāš, as we've seen, means that which has previously not existed. And it's new, and it's different. The old covenant will be replaced by the new covenant. Let's move on here to problem number two. Look at this. Jeremiah 31:33. All Adventists, you know this, right? God's going to put his law within them and write it on the hearts. Now, Adventists, I want you to think carefully about this. What exactly is going to be written on the Adventist heart? Just don't say law. That's not the answer. I want the words. Give me the words. Tell me which 26 words, which 43 words, where they come from, why these words are chosen and others aren't chosen. I want to know the what. My emphasis is on the what. This section is going to create a significant problem, one that exists right now still today for Adventists. Jeremiah 31:33 declares God's going to put his law on the hearts of men. Now, before we look at the accurate meaning of this passage, we're going to read what the Adventist understanding of this is. So let's begin here. So what do Adventists do with this? And those of us that either know about Adventism, like me who's never been an Adventist but knows about them, and you former Adventists already know this. I will put my law within them. I will write it on their hearts. And what do Adventists do? They take this promise of the new covenant and they force into the meaning here where it says, I will put my law, and Adventists put on their stone glasses and see 10 commandments. God's going to write his 10 commandments. Does it say 10 commandments here, by the way? No, it doesn't. I will put my law within them, right? I'll write it on their hearts. I got more to say about that, but let's just do this. What do Adventists teach? Well, we have the inspired seer and revelator herself, who was given inspired instruction, and now we got the seal of the prophet on this. Here we are. She writes essentially the same thing, 1907, 1912. The same law that was engraved upon the tablets of stone is written by the Holy Spirit on the tables of the heart. And she says exactly the same thing here. So now we got the seal of the prophet of the Seventh-day Adventists. That prophet who was God inspired from 1844 to 1915 has thus declared it so, and I guess so it is, and written in exactly. Now Adventists are just going to copy her, and here it starts. 1988. Inside the ark lay God's law, which he promised to write on our hearts. Jeremiah.31. 1890. Let's jump backwards almost 100 years. The law engraved on the two tables of stone was no longer to be external, but written on the fleshly tables of the heart. Let's jump up to the mid-1950s, right after World War II. Rightly viewed, they were but 10 great promises guaranteed by the Father to be written on our hearts. 10 great promises. See, it's just limited to the tablets of stone. The law formerly written on tables of stone will be written in the heart by the Spirit of God. There it is again in 1919. Let's do it again here. 1999. The new covenant consists not in the replacement of the Ten Commandments, but simpler, better laws, internalized. They're saying this essentially the same thing there. About 1934. The promise is not, I will abolish my law or change it, but I will write it. Not 9 precepts, but all of it, right? Meaning all 10 on the heart. Here we are again, 1982. Characteristic of the new covenant is the writing of the law within the heart. Remember, Jeremiah doesn't even say this, right? And here again we have, 1946. God does not say he will do away with this law or promulgate a new law, but he says he will write it on the heart. It's the same law. He has no other law. In other words, saying the Torah is the Torah. He has no other Torah. Remember that, because this is actually going to get refuted in this video, by the way. So, okay, Adventists, you've already told me now, over and over and over, for well over 100 years, what was written on the tablets of stone is what God's going to write on the heart. Remember what I said earlier in this video? I want to know the exact words. Okay, Adventists, here's your chance to jump up. I want you to tell me right now, what are the specific words written on the hearts of Adventists? I want the exact words. Give me, how many words are there? 40, 50, 60, 37, 52? I want the exact words. And then I want you to go to the Bible and show me where they're at. So, by the way, what are the exact words? Because now we know, and if you haven't watched Angel's video, which precedes this one, you need to go watch it, because it brings in Exodus 34:14 through 28. There are 3 sources in the Bible for the so-called 10 Commandments. Is it the 10 Commandments in Exodus that God's writing on the Adventist heart? How about the ones from Deuteronomy, which are not exactly the same as the ones in Exodus? And the 10 Commandments in Exodus 34:14 through 28 are not the same either. Now remember, we have a Sabbath as a memorial to creation in Exodus. We got a Sabbath, remember your slaves in Egypt in Deuteronomy. And in Exodus 34, which is, by the way, the only set identified as the 10 Commandments, it is the 6th command, and it's a day of rest too, even if you're in plowing season. Come on, Adventists. You believe and you teach what was written on the tablets is what's written on the heart of Adventists. Which set of tablets do you want to choose from here? Or maybe you want to have a 4th option, which I don't have on the screen. This is really interesting. Don't you think this is important? Should you not know the exact words? Because your inspired prophet and your literature teaches what was written on the tablets of stone is what's written on our hearts. What are the exact words? Shouldn't you know them? Because I can tell you, you don't know them. I'll say this, though, that your teachers and your theology are so deficient, they never define the exact words. If they are defined, let me know, and let me know who did them. Give me the source, give me the quote, give me the page, give me the publication. I can't find it. I can find no Adventist say, these are the words written on the heart. And by the way, and if you do, that's only half an answer. Because now you need to answer for, why isn't these words written on the heart? If you say it's Exodus, why are you excluding Deuteronomy? Why are you excluding Exodus 34:14 through 28? So just simply saying, these are the words, now you need to tell me why these are not the words, because there are also 10 commandments too. But I can tell you this, Seventh-day Adventist, you got no idea which of these 3 sets are written on your heart. You have no idea. Your Adventist theology and actually your theologians are shallow, deficient, just infantile. You make these bold claims and statements, but you can't define it. And not only that, even if you try to define it, you then have to tell me, why are you excluding the other two? As of this video, this question can't be answered because I am not aware of any Adventist actually declaring the exact words written on the Adventist heart and why the other commandments are being ignored. So this problem number 2, you know what? We can't solve it here because Adventism has no answer. Adventist theology, deficient, infantile, incomplete. They can't even define what law is written on the hearts and why that one was chosen as opposed to the others. So now we see Adventist theology does not know the exact words that are supposed to be written on the heart of Adventists because they just don't tell us. The best Adventist theology can do is go, the law, what was written on the tablets was written on the hearts. Well, what was written on the tablets? And which set of laws are you choosing? And why aren't you choosing the other ones? Adventist theology is just infantile. Jeremiah 31:33 states, I will put my law within them and I will write it on their hearts. So Adventists see the word law and they think 10 commandments. But just look at Jeremiah 31:33. Does it say 10 commandments? No. It says Torah, the law. And that word has a variety of meanings. Torah does not always mean 10 commandments. And Torah does not always mean that it's what we're going to see written on the tablets of stone. You have to be very careful when you read the scriptures, and Adventists aren't careful and they pour their own meanings into it and they teach error, and they are teaching error right here. So let's look. Does the word Torah mean 10 commandments universally all the time? Can we read Jeremiah 31:33 and think, oh yeah, that means 10 commandments? No, we can't. But let's start here and let's examine that. Well, let's look at what we've looked at before many times in either videos preceding this, and that is this Dictionary of Old Testament Theology and Exegesis. We're going to look at volume number 4 right here in this case. Just to refresh your memory, here's law of God. Here's Torah. It means direction, instruction, law, the law. Doesn't say 10 commandments there, does it? No, because it doesn't mean that. It occurs about 220 times in the Old Testament. And generally speaking, Torah designates some divine standard of conduct for God's people. Read that again. Some divine standard of conduct for God's people. It does not always mean 10 commandments, because actually you don't even see it up here. It doesn't mean 10 commandments. At times, Torah pertains to words of prophets. Do you ever think about that? We can have a Torah of a prophet, a word of instruction of a prophet, and even includes words of instruction from a father or mother to a child. You're going to see an example of that. We are going to have writers in the Old Testament giving their Torah. So Torah doesn't always mean actually God divine law. It is instruction or divine instruction. And Adventists, you're going to see that this is utterly just going to refute your theology. So let's start here. We got about 4 or 5 different cases here. We're going to look at Torah and how it's used. Point number 1, cultic, which means the nation of Israel. In terms of their ceremony, there are divine commands. There are Torahs that pertain to the manner in which a proper relationship with the Lord is to be maintained. We have Torahs of sacrifice and offering. And now we're going to have Torahs of, you just saw A, we're going to go down through number G. We got Torahs for how to observe and how to do a Sabbath and a feast. A Torah for temple worship. A Torah versus clean and unclean. Again, divine instructions. Divine instructions for a Passover. A Torah. Consecration is of the firstborn. An exclusion of a Torah for exclusion of foreigners. Are you getting the message here yet, Seventh-day Adventists, that Torah does not universally mean 10 commandments? And we got all kinds of Torahs. We got a Torah against idolatry. Let's move on to point number 2. We got a Torah within the nation of Israel, or Torahs, for civil, social, and judicial matters. A variety of uses of Torah in point number 3. Let's move on to number 2. Let's move to number 3. How about Torah? Torah refers in a lot of cases simply to the whole book of Deuteronomy. Well, there you go. That's A lot of laws in Deuteronomy, which is why we saw earlier it is the law or law. We have Torah on human instructions for godly living. We have this: the son is admonished to listen to the Torah of his father. So an Adventist reading this would see Torah and think the Ten Commandments of his father. Yeah, that's because Adventists don't know how to read original languages. We can have the Torah of a father, or the Torah of his mother could be given to him, divine instruction. Other uses of Torah can include, we have a Torah, one reference to the stone tablets in Exodus 24:12. We can have Torah, regulations concerning the gathering of manna, or the test for an unfaithful wife, etc. Keep reading here. We can have Torah, which says, and by the way, let me say this, not every mention of Torah means the same thing. This is news for Adventists. Hence, this is so important. Remember this. When Torah is used without further specification, it is often difficult to say with certainly precisely what the content of the Torah is. If it doesn't say, we don't know. Let's continue reading the next sentence, which says, what appears to be certain, however, is that Torah refers to an authority and standard that was recognized by the Jewish community as binding and at least generally of divine origin. Generally. This includes human instructions. We got human Torahs, such as Proverbs. Number 6 and 7, we have Torah of teachers of Torah, which can be actually priests, etc. We see Ezra, Nehemiah, Malachi. We can have a Torah which is a general attitude towards the Torah. And by the way, it says the Old Testament's attitude towards Torah, which again, it's a very general term unless it's specifically defined. In a general term, Torah, these divine instructions have a positive outlook in the Old Testament as they're being used. This is a really good example. Psalm 78. It's a particularly important psalm in that it not only gives us one striking example of the diversity of Torah, diversity of usage in the Old Testament. Look at this. In verse 1 of Psalm 78, the psalmist exhorts his readers to listen to his Torah. Now, a silly Adventist is going to read this and think, oh, listen to his Ten Commandments. No, listen to his instruction, his teaching, his Torah. What is telling is that what that teaching contains. And what is it? His Torah is what? He's going to speak of things of old. He's going to give history. What has been handed down from the fathers for successive generations. Torah teaching. That should sound kind of familiar to some of you. But let's just look at it here. Here's Psalm 7:8. When the psalmist is saying, listen to my Torah. Again, silly Adventists are going to look at this and go, oh, listen to my Ten Commandments. No, Torah. Unless it's specifically defined, we don't know what it means. But in this case, we know that Torah is the instructions of the author of Psalm 78:1. And does not mean 10 commandments. Here's a great example of Torah, divine instruction. We just read in the Psalms. Looking back throughout history serves us as instructions for the present. Romans 15:4. For whatever was written in former days was written for our instruction. Torah is another way to say it. That's how we saw Torah used in Psalms, even though this is Greek. That through endurance and through encouragement the scriptures we might have hope. Looking at things written in the past, as we just saw in Psalm 78, as the Apostle Paul is telling us here, are instructive for us. And well, that's one of the meanings of Torah, is give good instruction. So here's problem number 3 for the Adventists. Sorry, Torah does not universally mean 10 commandments. That's it. Problem number 2 and 3 together, Adventism, you can't even define the exact words written on your hearts that you love to claim from Jeremiah, because in Adventism, they do not define the exact words nor where they're from. And if they do, they are not telling us why. They are ignoring the other sources. And Torah does not mean universally the 10 Commandments. So Jeremiah 31:33 is a promise that man will have divine instructions written on his heart. It does not say the 10 Commandments, and it doesn't say the Mosaic Law. It just says Torah, divine instructions. We know that God will write divine instructions on the hearts of man, because that's what he said in Jeremiah 31:33. But the divine instructions that will be written on his heart, we don't know what they are. But we can say this. Are these divine instructions going to be written on the literal heart or something else? So let's look here. Let's look at this theological workbook of the Old Testament right here. Here's volume 1 of that workbook, and we're going to look at the word for heart, lebab. And I got it circled at the top. In certain cases, and you can see the red box here, we'll actually look at the first underline. Heart can actually mean heart, but it can also mean understanding, mind. So let's just look at the text in the red box there. It says concrete meanings of leb, of heart. It refers to the internal organ and to analogous physical location. So it can refer to the actual heart. However, in its abstract meanings, which is what we have here in Jeremiah, heart became the richest biblical term for the totality of man's inner or immaterial nature. Read that closely, Seventh-day Adventists. Man has an immaterial nature. In biblical literature, it is the most frequently used term for man's immaterial personality functions. Did you know you have immaterial aspects to you, Seventh-day Adventists? Then it goes on to say, as well as the most inclusive term for them, since in the Bible, virtually every immaterial function of man is attributed to the heart. Look here. The term heart, it's used comprehensively to refer to a person's will, intentions, thought processes, emotions, speech, actions, which together in composite unity work well. They can work we have intentions for the good and we can have intentions for the bad. No, God is not going to write on the actual physical organ of the heart, but God is going to write within your immaterial self His divine instructions. How do you feel now, Adventists? You have an immaterial self, and that is what God is writing His divine commands on. Not a physical location, not a physical heart, but your immaterial self. But you didn't know that you had an immaterial aspect of you existing right now. So those divine instructions promised in Jeremiah 31:33 are not defined. We just know we will get them. We don't know what they are. But let me give you a sneak preview of these divine instructions in action. Here they are in Romans 2:14 and 15. Apostle Paul is speaking here about the Gentiles, the non-Jews. For when the Gentiles who do not have the law, see, the law wasn't given to the non-Jews, but by nature, these non-law keepers do what the law requires. Verse 15 says, they show the work of the law is written on their hearts. But don't stop reading there, because there's more to it than that. While their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. Look at the and. Yes, they have God's divine instructions written on their hearts, and their conflicting, and by their conscience, their conflicting thoughts accuse or excuse them. That's the conscience. Humans have, now we have an inner sense of right. We have moral compass, right, wrong, moral, immoral. This is sometimes called the conscience. The conscience will, as we saw in Romans 2:15, it will either accuse us or excuse us. We can violate the Torah, the divine instructions in our own inner being. See, that's what Apostle Paul is writing about in Romans 2:15. The Gentiles and are exercising their conscience to accuse themselves or excuse themselves from certain behaviors. And that happens to us today. That's why God's divine instructions written on our heart we're not going to find them in some book somewhere and say, oh, here's God's 1,336 divine instructions that He's written on our heart. It doesn't exist. Jeremiah 31:33 doesn't tell us that. All it tells us is God is going to write divine instructions on our heart. And I'm going to say that these divine instructions are going to be slightly different for everybody. I'm going to share a personal example with you, how I think I violated some of God's divinely written instructions on my heart for a period of time. I don't know, this could have been 10, 12 years ago. For a period of time, for whatever reason, I wasn't doing my apologetical work, and I found myself sitting on the computer and I was watching too many silly videos too much of the time, just burning up time doing silly, frivolous things and not things for the kingdom of God. I feel God has given me the gift of study, teaching, and apologetics, and that is what I need to do. But I wasn't doing that. I was wasting my time. My conscience was quick to convict me of this after a certain point in time and say, you're just wasting your time. I was convicted. God's divine instructions on my heart were saying, this is sin. Quit it, knock it off, Get back to the work I've assigned you to do. So God's own divine instructions are written on our hearts. We will be convicted of that sin, and we'll either listen or we will harden our hearts and sear our consciences and continue to sin. We'll either act appropriately or we'll act inappropriately. But there's just one example of how it works today. So in summary, new means new in Hebrew. And you're going to see here in a minute in Greek when I do the next video. So ḥāḍāš in Jeremiah 31:33 means new, or that which previously did not exist. The promise of a new covenant means the old one's going to be replaced. That's why it's called new. It doesn't exist. That is the new one. So new does not mean the same. New does not mean a different location. And new does not mean not new, as Adventists teach. New means new. I'm going to do a video on this, and I'm going to absolutely prove that the Old Covenant, Mosaic Law, the Sabbath, have all been replaced by the New Covenant and have been abrogated, are rendered obsolete. Adventists believe the Ten Commandments are written on their hearts. I won't say everybody's hearts, because we don't all believe that, but Adventists believe it. But you know what? There's three completely different sets of Ten Commandments. And Adventists have no idea what the exact words are that are written on their heart. They don't have the source, and they can't explain why one source was chosen and the others were excluded. They got no clue. But they all will run around and say, oh, the law is written on our hearts. Okay, what law? Give me the words. They can't. Adventist theology is just infantile, and that's what this video proves. This is by far the biggest issue for Adventism in this video right here, because it highlights deficient, immature, infantile Adventist theology. And the Hebrew word for Torah has a variety of meanings. Torah can include Torah instructions from priests, from prophets, from fathers, from mothers. Absent a clear definition, and you saw it in this book here, absent a clear definition and the use of Torah, if the use of Torah is there and it doesn't tell us exactly what it's going to be used for, we can't say. All we can say is there's going to be some kind of divine instructions. And Jeremiah 31:33 does not define Torah. But we know that God will write divine instructions for us. Therefore, to overlay 10 commandments on it in Jeremiah 31:33 is reading into the text that which is not there. And that's Adventism. That is unbiblical, and Adventists shouldn't be doing that. Let me just finish this here with this and say, stand by for the next video, which is going to prove the Old Covenant is obsolete, abolished, gone, replaced by the new, as promised in Jeremiah 31:33. And that means the Old Covenant laws, ceremonies, Sabbaths, etc., gone. Proven by Jeremiah 31:33. Stand by for that.